Hi, I'm Kerm Zaman.
I'm Asif.
Hi, I'm Philip.
And we are Fifth Tribe. We're a digital agency. We'd like to welcome you to the Ask an Agency podcast.
Our first 8-hour episode.
An 8-hour nonstop.
Maximum it'll let us broadcast for.
We're filibustering the agency world. Better wages and such for agencies. So what we're going to do in this podcast is we are going to take questions from some of our customers, supporters, and sort of fans about how agency life works, ranging from topics like technology, startups, project management, and a host of things. And we'll be answering your questions live. So welcome aboard to our first live cast ever. Yay. Just clap awesome.
All right.
So with that said, I guess we can start the cast. Anything you want to say before we get started, Asif?
No, let's just get to answer some questions. That's what we're here for. What do you mean?
It's so funny. All right, cool. All right, Camilla, let's go ahead. So
right.
Camilla is our marketing intern. She's from Denmark. Welcome to the United States. You've been doing a great job over the past few weeks helping us build up our brand strategy online. So she's been sort of compiling these questions, and she'll be throwing out hopefully some easier questions for us. Nothing too hard.
All right, the theme for today is going to be project management. And the first question I'm going to give you guys is, what is one app or tool that has made your work life easier?
What's one app or tool that's made our work life easier?
It's a good question.
That's a great question.
I mean, there's a bunch of tools though, right?
There's a bunch. What's your favorite one?
I have to think about it. I know what your favorite one is though. I like to guess. Airtable probably.
Yep, that's
You've become an Airtable master. You know all about Airtable.
Yeah,
everything
I'm
involved in Airtable. I think you've actually went back in the time machine and co-founded Airtable as well.
I'm a black belt in Airtable. So for those of you that don't know what Airtable is, it's a relational database, but it looks and feels like you're using Slack. And so how we discovered Airtable.
It's like a spreadsheet, like what's it called? Google Sheets.
Yeah, it's like a Google Sheet, but you can manipulate the data in a way that you can't normally do in a convenient manner, like a Google spreadsheet would do. So when we first started our company, we tried many different ways to organize the team, and we tried a variety of different tools. And Google Spreadsheet sort of became like the default project management tool, which was not very great to begin with. No. When Airtable first came out, we liked it because the visual aesthetic was important. We started using Slack a couple of years ago.
Yeah, probably in 2014.
Yeah. So Slack was great. We had tried HipChat out before. It was not so hip. It was really hard to use, and people tried it out. They would say,
it's not so HipChat.
It was great. I planned that out during my warm up. So HipChat was like terrible. People would sign in. They would just send one or two messages, and then that was it. We were using Jira as a project management tool. And what we found out was like Slack just was kind of a game changer for us as a company. I think we found it was a lot easier to communicate than through going through emails and through one-on-one meetings, and a lot of information was being lost. And Asif, you're the one who brought Slack into the company.
Yeah,
you're responsible for all this madness.
I know, just nonstop interruptions,
asynchronous communication or synchronous communication, whatever it's called. So we liked what we saw with Slack, and when we first heard about Airtable, it had a lot of, we were using Google Spreadsheets for everything. It was hard to track. It was hard to use. It was very confusing. And Airtable, what they did was it allowed us to create sort of a central repository where you have like multiple different types of data, and anybody can use it. And it's very visually, I think, pleasing. It's very easy to use.
That's interesting, though. One of the things with Airtable that when we were looking for some solution that was like Airtable was that most of the other solutions were just god-awful hideous. They looked like something that had come out of like a Windows 98 machine. Everything was kind of gray and just boxes, and it was awful. And so that in and of itself like really made Airtable kind of stand apart from a lot of the other folks in that space.
And why do you think that's important? Why do you think it's important for technology to be relatable?
Because nobody wants to look at gray stuff all the time. Most people sit in a cubicle probably if they're on a computer and they're gray already. Like maybe they want something else.
What if you're colorblind and that's just the world that you see?
Nobody's so colorblind they only see gray unless they're like
Yeah.
I don't know. They see they see yellow and blue.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Now I learned something. That's why we have Ask an Agency.
Yeah. If you're a lagomorph, then you only see in black and white. Then maybe it doesn't matter. But for the rest of us, Airtable, it has colors. It has like a playful design a little bit too. Mm-hmm. And for something that's effectively like spreadsheets that are backed by a database, it actually looks kind of friendly and nice.
Yeah, that's important as a guiding philosophy at Fifth Tribe is that we believe technology, it's ultimately designed for humans, and so it should be usable by humans. And what happens is a lot of tech platforms, they go into over-engineering mode, where if you put developers in a room and only developers, they will tend to build things that like are completely unusable by a human being, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to flex their intellectual know-how. They build features that people don't need, and it looks ugly. And when you have a design that's actually pretty interactive and it feels good using it, then people tend to want to use it more, right? So that's kind of, I think, what you were sort of getting at with Airtable. It's not just the colors, because it's very colorful, but the user experience is also like really.
But also the colors are amazing. It has the best colors.
It's like they were on LSD, I think, when they designed it.
It was a nice graphic design that helps you kind of very quickly be able to tell things apart and see where things are, because you have that gray on gray style. Guess what? You can't tell one thing from another. It's very hard to do anything. So.
And if you're doing project management, the whole point of it is to actually be able to make decisions very quickly. So you don't want to spend all your time sifting through information. You want it to be intuitive. You, as a manager, you just want to be able to like, okay, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? How do we improve? Or what are the tasks in terms of priorities? And having that visual component of design is very important in terms of making those distinctions.
So the colors help communicate information. That's why stop signs are red.
Yeah,
so you see them very clearly. So that's the whole point.
Yeah, it'd be fun to see gray stop signs all over the place and flashlights that were.
It wouldn't be fun.
It'd be terrible. Cause out car accidents. It would probably be not that much different from 95 how it normally is in terms of traffic control.
I mean, it's just slow. Just nothing is happening.
All right, cool. Yeah, so Airtable it's been great for different parts of the company. So we use it for marketing and sales. We do our cold email campaigns through it. We do our RFP management through it. We do our content marketing through it. And because it's so flexible, imagine a Kanban that you can design, and it has multiple different types of options, and people can create their own views of the data. So if people want to view it as a list, they can view it as a list. If they want to view it as a Kanban, they can view it as a Kanban. If they want to view it as a calendar, they can view it as a calendar. So as an example, one of the ways that we use it is for RFPs, is that we have all of the RFPs that we're applying for at that time in a list, and then we can organize it by calendar so people can very easily see without having to log into a separate app like Google Calendar. What did the RFPs do this week? And you can sort the data into, like I said, into a Kanban, so you can see who's working on what very clearly, or any other sort of.
For some stuff, it's kind of taken the place of Trello, which is also a really good tool. We used Trello really previously to that to do sort of Kanban style stuff. Or if you prefer Kanban, that's
I thought it was Kanban.
It's probably Kanban because it's Japanese.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know that. I don't know how to pronounce it.
I don't know. We'll ask the Toyota Corporation.
We'll have to Google that. That'll be another Ask an Agency question. How do you pronounce Kanban?
How do you pronounce Trello? So Trello, it's basically allows you to set up columns, and then you can drag stuff around. And most people probably used it if you're watching this. And so I still personally use it for a bunch of different things. Just sort of keeping personal tasks moving, things like that are outside of sort of the normal sprint, because we use Agile. So we have a sprint, and everything's kind of we have a large board for all the tasks other people are doing, and the entire team, how to manage that and all that good stuff. But for individual items, it's helpful to have a Trello or some other sort of some sort of project management system just for your own personal self rather than for everybody. Mm-hmm. So still using Trello.
It's
free.
It's also free. The other thing is that these tools are, in contrast to older platforms that were designed for different project management systems. And I think we have another question that you mentioned the word agile. Mm-hmm. So I think, Camilla, you had another question for us.
We got a question from one of our network that asked specifically how a digital agency uses Agile Scrum as a project management tool.
That's a good question. I mean, I guess the first part is what is Agile Scrum? And the second part is how do we use it?
Sure. Would you like to take the first part?
I'll take it, bro. Let's do this, bro. I'm wearing my 7076 shirt because we're at 7076. Trying to get meta here. So Agile Scrum is a software development lifecycle, in contrast to what's called waterfall. And imagine you're in the 90s and you're producing software, and the old way of doing things was that you would ship software physically on a floppy disk or a CD. And you would have your requirements phase where a business analyst is sitting down with the client and trying to understand what is the software supposed to do that creates business value. Then they generate those requirements. Then you have a design phase where they're actually designing the software, what it looks like, what it feels like. Then you're building it out. You're giving it to the dev team, and they are actually coding it. They're putting it maybe on a test environment. And then you have a test team. They're coming in. They're testing out the software to make sure it's both fulfilling the requirements and also there's no bugs in it. Then you have a QA team, and then you're going through the cycle, and then you're releasing the software you're shipping, usually maybe in about a year or so. And that approach worked really great when software was physically transported on CDs and disks. It didn't work so well in the age of cloud computing. And now what would happen is, if you follow that process, either you would build software that people don't need,
Right.
or you would build software that's shipped late, because if you're not adjusting your requirements to what the client wants, maybe in the process they discover that a competitor released something and they want to adapt their software to it.
Sometimes developing software is like the Oregon Trail. Like you start with a group of people, and by the end, it's a whole different set
It's
of
a whole
people.
different thing,
So,
and
you
your uncle died of dysentery, and somebody didn't feel the river, and your oxen go down. So the software that ends up being built out is like very different from what you started with. And so either you build it, if you're on time and the budget, the customer is frustrated because it's not like, it's already kind of like a little bit obsolete. It's not exactly what they wanted, and they paid all this money for it, and so they're frustrated. Or what ends up happening is you do whatever the client wants, and you're just jumping through hoops to make them happy. And then your deadlines get pushed farther and farther. You're not on budget. You're not on time. And then you build something that's late. And then their customers are usually pretty unhappy. And think of like games shipping late as a result of, like people get very upset, on social media.
People are crazy. That's why it's just really hard to make games. That's the reason that happens.
Yeah. So Agile Scrum is in contrast to all that. And what it allows you to do is that it builds shippable, valuable software in increments, and you basically iterate accordingly. And so that's sort of a very quick description of what Agile Scrum is. And then we could go into a bit more details and like what's involved with that.
Sure. But let's just, I think the second part of the question is, can an agency use Agile Scrum for because really the whole system is built around developing software. And so
especially enterprise software,
right? Like big systems, things like that. So what happens when you're not building a big system and it's not all just programming tasks? Because typically the way in Agile the tasks are, the way that they're formatted is not like, hey, make this feature. It's like, as a user, I want to accomplish X. And so those things are called user stories. And so, that's cool if it's software and you're trying to accomplish a particular thing. Like I want the user to be able to enter their username and password and log in, and then they should see X. But if it's like, hey, can you fix the graphic on this thing, blah, blah, that's not really like a story. But
it's a sad story.
It's a sad story sometimes. It depends on
the client is just not happy with the design and you want to do that.
It could be. Or, somebody just typoed something or accidentally, instead of putting the actual graphic, submitted a picture of their family for some reason. Those kind of things.
Those kind of awkward situations.
Yeah. But outside of that, it's really not story based. It doesn't have a user story behind it. And so typically that's not something you would put into this kind of system, but we've found that it's actually, you can do it and it worked perfectly fine. There's no negative effects for putting in an Agile. What it really Agile allows us to do is kind of just be that Agile, right? We can change stuff very quickly. So as an agency, a lot of times what we expected we're going to be doing at the beginning of the week, sometimes that stuff changes. It's not infrequent where we get other things coming in and we have to swap things in and out. And so the cool thing with Agile is before the sprint starts, that particular period of work starts, you can go ahead and set okay, we're going to do this and this and this. But if stuff changes, you can go, okay, well, I'm going to take this new thing that came up and I'm going to replace something that we were planning on doing instead. And so because you can swap things in and out, it always allows you that flexibility to change things. And that's really what you need, right? You need a system that's flexible, but also hold people accountable, right? So you need to, and you need to be able to look back and be like, okay, cool, what did we do this week? Number one, what did we accomplish? But also what did we do right? What did we do well? How can we improve so we're doing better over time, right? Because Agile is an iterative process. Building a company is an iterative process. Most everything is an iterative process. So how do you make sure that you can continue that process, basically till as far as you can take it, right? And so just continuously improving that. And so even if you're an agency and you're doing stuff that's not strictly software development all the time, or part of it's only software development, it's still a very useful system to try to use, and learning it's actually very valuable. So I would definitely recommend giving it.
Yeah, I think it's what's interesting is even though it's not software, you can treat it like a project that's like a software project, in the sense that most of the reason why I think Agile Scrum works really well with agency work is because you're treating the customer experience as a unified experience.
Right.
And so, otherwise what happens is if you break it into like billable hours or whatever, the designers are doing their things, the developers are doing their things, and they're just like doing their work, but it's creating a disjointed experience. Whereas if you put it in an agile experience, everybody is seeing everybody else's tasks for the entire project. So, for example, like if you're doing a promotional a sale through social media, you can see that the design part for the banners to go on the website or social media, or the email marketing campaign, or the AdWords, or the YouTube video, like all of that is like tied around a single, epic. And so there's user stories, which are individual, sort of features, and then an epic is where you kind of bring it all together around a singular project. And so what we're doing is we treat each client as an epic,
Right.
and we do like 1 week sprints. And so each week, we're sitting down with the client and saying, okay, like, hey, what is it that you want to do the following week? And we have a general map of it, but I think the week by week view works better than going out too far, because the client's demands change like pretty quickly, I would say, right?
Well, I think their needs change quickly, right? So like what they need and what they want is going to be different week to week. So splitting it out and kind of, we definitely treat like a client like a project often, because everything we're doing for them, especially for like retainer stuff, everything we're doing with them is generally intertwined in some way. So managing it like a single unit, like a single project, is super useful, because you can just kind of pick and choose things and select things and pop in what you need for that particular week, and be able to kind of see through everything, because all this stuff is connected together. So keeping it as a project makes a lot of sense, the way you would with any project. Like, if you're building software, all that stuff is related together, bundled up together. So why not do that with retainer stuff or something? Or, if you have a client that's doing really any kind of task. And the good thing is, like, so typically what you would have is, I think you mentioned this with the hours. So a lot of times with that, people estimate things with hours, like, oh, this many hours is, how long it's going to take to do X thing. Well, there's not really hours. You can do some hour stuff in sort of agile, but really the way to do it is story points, right? Where you kind of, what you're really looking at is estimating how much effort is required, or how hard something is, the complexity of that item. And so by just focusing on the complexity of it, you're not really focused on like, is it going to take me 15 minutes to do this or an hour? You're just like, okay, this is stuff we know it's about this amount of complexity. So,
and why don't hours matter? Like,
because, so really, like,
why does that backfire with clients if you try to focus on hours?
So because
even though it's like fair, right? Like, oh, I'm doing all this work, I should be paid on an hourly basis or billable hours.
Right.
Why does that eventually? Why do clients hate that? I mean, they like it, but they hate it, right?
So there's a thing, right? In general, like, what is hourly stuff incentivized generally? So if it takes me a long time to do something, for example, maybe it's just a complex problem. Maybe we didn't understand it fully at the time. We go, it's gonna take like 10 hours, and then you go into it, and it's actually like 30 hours worth of work. If you go and go like, oh, here's 3 hours worth of work that we did, it's like, you may have legitimately done it, but
it may be a simple feature,
right? But it may just require a lot of work.
And then the client will scrutinize it and be like, why'd you waste so
much time? And then they feel like, oh, you really like, you basically like took money out of their pocket almost. And then on the opposite end, it's like, as a agency, like, we don't do this, but like, you're probably incentivized to try and inflate your hours. Like, oh yeah, yeah, sure, I went and, got the coffee, then I made a run to the bathroom, then I went downstairs to the corner store to get a candy bar, and then, but like, that was part of the same.
That's not how we do it, by the way. That's not our daily schedule, but
I've worked at, like, places that like, people are like, oh man, I made X amount of dollars going to the bathroom today. It's like, okay, that's weird. That's a weird conversation we're having.
That's strange.
But
you need to hang out.
It was a long time ago. It doesn't happen anymore. It was when I first was a young pup.
The other thing, just to the other problem is what it does is it incentivizes people to the client not to talk to you. Because what happens when you have a problem, the client's gonna be like, oh, I gotta go talk to these guys. They're gonna charge me this amount of dollars per minute, whatever, or 15 minutes or hour. And then what they're doing is they don't want to talk to you about that, and that creates a problem, because in reality, what happens is a lot of the time is that you're co-creators with your client. And you want to have this partnership relationship with them where you're trying to solve the problems, together, as opposed to like having this adversarial relationship, which is just terrible. And the screen's flipping back and forth. It's the ghost of the cast. No, I'm just kidding. I think Jamila just stepped away. I think he's doing stuff. So anyhow, so that was, that's a quick nutshell of Agile Scrum and how we use it as an agency. And just as an FYI, we invested as a company to look into Agile Scrum. We tried it for like 2 years before we got it kind of done right. And when we started to do it, we just signed up for all the tools. We use like Jira, we use like HipChat, we were using like GitHub. Like we were just trying to set up all these systems, but we didn't really have a good process. We were just like reading books and kind of self-learning. And what ended up happening is we ended up all getting Agile Scrum certified. So myself, Asif, and Adam, we ended up just taking a class with the Scrum Alliance. And that was, I think, kind of like a sort of like a huge shift in the company when we all got that additional training, not just about the products we were using, but also the process that we were using. And we realized a lot of the problem was getting requirements. And we started to do these things called product roadmaps for each of our projects and really mapping out like who's the customer, what's their goal, what's the value, what are the high-level requirements, what's the tech stack, and then we would present the requirements to the tech team, and we treated it as one team. When we say tech team, we mean the designers, the developers, the testers, the marketers, not just just the developers.
Right.
So people think about a project very differently. And so if you have a designer looking at a problem and you're going to launch a project, they're not going to think about the tech part of it. They're going to think about how is it going to look and feel for the customer? How do I make the interfaces more user friendly?
Sure.
And a marketer is going to be like, okay, how do I help amplify their marketing efforts? And maybe we should put the sign up at the end because we want people to just jump in and we want to have a share button and all those different things. Having those different perspectives, that diversity is actually very, very important for how we build things out.
Yeah.
Good. So Agile Scrum as an agency, it's challenging. We've been around for about 6 years, and it took us 2 years of just trying things out. And finally, we were able to really sort of implement it and kind of get from there.
All right. We've thoroughly talked about Agile Scrum.
I think we completed the sprint, and we did the retro for the Agile Scrum question. And so I think we can go to the next question.
Let's do the third and final question. So we try to do a lot of games. So one of our fans asked, what's your agency's process for building games?
Panic.
So we built out a game a month usually, and we've built out about 14 games probably at this point. We're on game 13 or 14. I lost track.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Probably in that range. So what is our process? So okay, let's go into like, a lot of the games we were building, they're for clients. And it's often part of like a marketing effort type of thing.
Promotion,
that sort of thing. And so we have a pretty well-worn process at this point of how we do that, how we think about it, and that kind of thing. And so usually it starts with us kind of sitting in a room and brainstorming. And we don't restrict the people who are in that room to brainstorm to, just the people who are going to build the game necessarily. We basically bring everybody into the company to kind of like just riff on ideas and come up with stuff and think about, okay, what would this look like?
Why do we do that?
Because everybody plays games and people have interesting ideas and divergent ideas that, if me as a person who is, into games and is programming and has built games, stuff like that, I may have a specific experience with that, but people who play a different type of game that's much more in line with the consumers or the customers who are actually we're actually trying to reach. They might also be in that room. Like we're not targeting people who are playing Fortnite on their PS4. We're looking at people who are, maybe just play stuff casual on their phone, things like that.
Even like kids and parents.
Things like that. And so having the people in the room who are their experience is more like that is very useful. On top of that, like people just play weird stuff that you would have no idea, and they'd be like, "Oh, I saw this thing," or "I have this idea," and it could just be very random, but it's something that everybody else can build on, and then we can go from there. Like a lot of the more recent games have been people who don't actually work on the game portion, but they come up with ideas that allow us to kind of springboard up from there to build something out. So it's really important to have a lot of people in the room, if you can, who have diverse experiences and that kind of thing. I'm sure at some point that doesn't work anymore. You can't have like 40 people in a room going, "Oh, in the back and the other." But to a certain degree, you can have like 10 people in a room or something and just have a conversation about it. And nobody's under any pressure, because if you don't use their idea, nobody's gonna be offended.
Mm-hmm.
They're just like, "Hey, we just want to help." And so
So each quarter we come up, like we pitch a bunch of ideas to the client. So we go into this room, everybody contributes. I think what's interesting about that process, it's not always like one idea wins. What happens sometimes is like you have multiple ideas and then they kind of like stick together and become a second or third idea.
Yeah,
that process is actually very
we
important.
crossbreed the ideas to come up with the and then we come up with the whatever the ending idea is. And then once we have like a pretty good idea, sometimes we'll narrow it down to a couple of ideas. We'll send it to the client to get their feedback, and then they'll pick something. And then usually the ideas have enough wiggle room where we can kind of.
And they usually pick the hardest idea. I feel
they
like
pick all. They
like
the hardest idea.
The easiest game and the hardest game. They'll pick like the hardest game. You'll be like, hey, we can do like Tetris or like a Pokemon augmented reality. They'll be like, Pokemon augmented reality. You're just like, okay, great. This is.
But also put Tetris in there.
Put Tetris in there.
Pokemon.
That's a good idea. We should do a game like that.
Delete this. We're
called
copyright us.
Yeah.
It's not Pokemon, obviously.
It's called Tetris Go. And you're just running around like your cars. Like,
you're capturing blocks and then you're trying to line them up.
Yeah, exactly.
It's pretty good.
Yeah, we should do that.
It's not bad.
So then we come up with these ideas.
We come up with ideas.
And then we'll
share them with the clients.
Ones.
Yeah.
You kind of go through
what seems doable.
Okay.
And we can actually, finish in the time period that
exactly.
we need.
So you're like, let's build a settlement on the moon and supposed to Mars, and don't give them the hardest, most complicated idea. Give them something that is like feasible, basically.
Something feasible, but also fun and different. Like we try not to do the same thing over and over again.
Why is that?
Because boring. Nobody wants to do that. Also, it's not very interesting to anybody. Like
I think it's kind of interesting how like we get really unhappy with doing the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, we're
just like, no, we got this out. We can do this, or we can just take it to the next level. We like push ourselves and challenge ourselves and try to. Every time we build a new game, even if it's the same like kind of type of game, we still innovate upon it and make it like better.
Yeah, because it's boring. To be honest, it's boring. It also doesn't challenge us. We don't learn anything new. And like part of the whole point of doing these things and doing it like pretty aggressive schedule is to learn new stuff.
Yeah.
Like, okay, how are we going to learn either new technology? Okay, how does this type of game work? Mm-hmm. Okay, what other features can we add to make this whole thing more effective? This time we reworked the innards of the whole like framework that we use for it. Okay, cool, great.
So let's talk about that. So we've got this process where usually on a quarterly basis, we'll pitch a few ideas based off of the brainstorming session as a company. And then each month we basically are launching a game, which is kind of unheard of. Like to build a website mobile app in a month alone is pretty intense, but building a game, which is much more complicated than a website mobile app, is really just like, it's kind of insane.
Challenging, yeah.
Yeah, but we're kind of crazy over here. So that's how we roll. So how do we able to do that? And you mentioned a framework, like what's a framework?
Okay, so framework is just, let's think of it as just
that works.
It does. Think of it as basically code that's more or less stable. We don't change it a lot, or we're not supposed to change it too much. That kind of sits there, and we carry it from game to game, and then we just change out like the middle part. Now, in this case, the problem is that the middle part is a game, and so it's very complicated. But everything around the game, from signing on, basically, putting in your nickname or whatever, so it goes on the leaderboard, the actual leaderboard, all that stuff, all that code. The discount code. So a lot of them are promotional. So when you play and you get a certain score, you'll get like a promo code to use on a website. So all that stuff is basically handled by a framework that we've built. And so we don't really change that from game to game. All we do is trying to change the game and then the skin of basically the parts that are in the framework. So for example, the front page obviously is going to be different. The game itself, and then some of the tertiary pages that exist. That stuff changes every time, but it's just the design. The underlying code is the same. So that's what we try. That at least expedites the process that allows us to do it every time. If we had to obviously build that from scratch, then it would be complicated to retest everything. And the good thing about a framework is that it's been tested. So when we put it into a new project or start a new project with it, we're not starting from oh, now we got to figure out, remember, does this work? Oh, we have no idea. It's already been tested, so we're good there.
So it allows us to build out games faster and faster. And then the next part is usually there's a prototype phase and also the design phase. And when do they usually occur in relation to one another?
So it depends. We've experimented with different stuff. Ideally, you want to do the prototype as quickly as possible.
That's actually really interesting because you would think that, for example, if you follow Waterfall, you'd be like, oh, I'm going to get the requirements for the game and the rules, and then I'm going to design it, and then I'm going to code it, and then I'm going to test it. And we're actually doing it kind of in reverse, where we've got the client to agree to the idea. We come up with some simple rules. but even the rules are not like really 100% nailed down. We kind
Well,
of like
it's like a 2-sentence description of it,
Yeah.
right? It's to give flavor to whatever the idea is and generally describe it, but it leaves us wiggle room because we're developing these in a month, right? So the more complex it is,
the margin of error is really small. Like you
right,
can't mess up
we
too much.
have to adjust and like make moves within a week's notice or a couple of days, or we're like 3 days from launch. It's like, well, we could do this. Let's just cut it and not do that part. Or there's actually a really smart solution around this problem, so let's try that instead. We do that pretty frequently. And
So the constraints actually drive innovation in a way. So like,
Right.
because you have this aggressive timeline, so you can't get too crazy with it. So you have to basically innovate within the constraints that you have, which is actually kind of like an interesting way to build it out, right?
yeah, absolutely. So because of that, we have to make hard choices. That's what it comes down
And still
to.
make it fun. So let's talk about, so you're building a prototype, and what are you looking for in the prototype? Like, what's the, so one is we don't design anything. It looks like a bunch of blocks or whatever.
It's basically like really nice programmer art because all our programmers are pretty good artists. So what we end up with is like the reason we do the prototype without like spending too much time on graphics and that and the other, because we understand, is this fun or does this suck?
And there's a
If it
balance,
sucks, we
right?
don't want to do it.
Yeah.
And then we're like, okay, well, why is this not good? And then we kind of sit there and we talk about it. And sometimes it could be the initial idea, right? But the reality is like ideas are like whatever. It's, it doesn't make it that much of a difference. It's really the execution of the idea that's going to make it playable or not playable. Because you can we've left ourselves enough like room to play around that we can kind of change a game pretty drastically if we need to. But the quicker we prototype ideas out, the quicker we can understand like, okay, yeah, this is going to be good or this is going to be kind of boring as hell.
And let's talk about game balance, because that's like kind of an important concept. Is that one of the things that we do when we're prototyping is just we're focusing on the gameplay. We want to make sure the gameplay, if it's too hard, then people are turned off from playing it. But if it's too easy, then it's just
no
boring.
challenge. Yeah, no,
And so
boring.
there has to be that creative tension with the
Right. So the thing with it being the interesting thing with games is that really like it's only fun as long as you're gaining a challenge out of it, but the challenge can't be too much.
If it's too much, then people quit.
Otherwise, you're frustrated.
It's like life. Just quit. It's like it's too challenging.
Don't do it, guys. Push through.
Push through.
You're gonna make it.
Adversity.
People love you. They believe in you. You're gonna do it.
Yes.
So, anyways,
We believe in you.
yeah, we believe in you. Maybe I don't know. I haven't met you. I'll find
It's
out.
probably just Adam that we're talking to.
Hey, Adam, how's it going?
I believe in you, Adam. I believe you exist. How much else?
Dang, it's rough. So, anyways,
All right.
I'm talking about video games. They're
so
great.
yeah. So life is hard, and then you build games.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing with what makes it interesting, like I was saying, is that the challenge is what makes it interesting. But if it's too hard, then you just get frustrated. You don't want to play anymore. So there's that balance, and so you try to start hitting that even in the prototype phase, just to getting an understanding of what are the levers you're going to pull to make something harder or make it easier. Right?
So you're tweaking that. You're building a prototype. You're testing it out. And how do you test it out? How do you get this game?
Right. Well, we just have people play it basically. So we try to get it into a playable state as early as possible. That way, people can kind of screw around
And who
with it.
usually plays it?
Everybody here.
Everybody at Fifth Tribe.
And then
as well.
everybody's family and friends who have
Yeah.
everybody's individual WhatsApp groups that we have.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we just put it on the website, up on social media and be like, hey, play this.
So what we do is we're prototyping, and we have beta testers that are just like trying out the game. They're telling us, is it too easy, too hard? And that feedback is actually important, because sometimes we're overthinking things, and people are like, oh, I love the game as it is. And then we just sort of just take it at face value. But sometimes people are like, oh, it's too hard. And then that's important, because sometimes we are in this bubble. We don't always know what's too hard. We always have disagreements. I always be like, oh, it's too hard if I'm not on the leaderboard. I'm like, yo, man, forget this game, man, it's too hard.
And then he'll get on the leaderboard and be like,
And look at that, let's keep
okay,
it. Yo, I'm in first place.
We can work for it.
Keep
We can
as
work
high.
for it.
Yeah. So getting external opinions is important, especially when non agency people play it, because when normal people out there are playing the game, you'll get a better sense of
Also, the target audience is not guy who plays games on his laptop all the time.
Yeah,
For a lot of
exactly.
these games, it depends on
Yeah.
who the client is, but that's not necessarily the audience.
Mhm.
So you have to kind of adjust for that. The other thing is that when people give you feedback about games or pretty much anything really, an application, that they'll often try to give you the solution, but really all you want to know is the problem. You can figure out the solution, because often the solution that they're giving you is not necessarily.
give me an example of that.
So you'd be like, oh, this is hard. Can you just make this enemy slower or whatever? And it's like, well, that's your perception of what's making it hard. It could be that, we actually just want to decrease the hit points of this enemy so it's easier to take out initially to give people that feeling of accomplishment, versus just making it easy, in different ways. So there's different ways to adjust things, right? There's so many levels.
Slight nuance.
There's a nuance to how you want
to. Not like drastic changes.
No, drastic changes aren't usually necessary.
Right.
People will be like, oh, and you turn a lever a little bit this way or that way, and all of a sudden it's a much different. It's a different game. How it feels different, and so that's the thing, right? When we're building these, we're trying to give the person playing it a certain feeling, whether it's like, oh, they're playing certain time, it's what they're supposed to feel like. Something intense, some challenge, and that's what we're trying to build for. If we adjust it in a certain way where we placate maybe somebody's complaint and go like, okay, cool, we've addressed that complaint, but we've taken away the actual point of the game, then we haven't really done the job. So it's a matter of kind of taking their feedback, looking at everybody's collectively, and going, okay, cool, there seems to be a pattern here. How can we address it without losing the thing that makes this game interesting? So it's a balancing act.
So that's interesting because you touched on the second principle. So one sort of principle is game balance, where it's don't make it too hard to make it too easy. It's got to be
Or also the other thing with game balance is it's not just about too hard, too easy. It's also
fairness.
It just feel fair. It doesn't actually have to be fair. It just has to feel fair to people.
If it's hard, but people feel like, oh, I can still win, and the game's not stacked, the rules are not stacked against me. So that's a second principle is fairness in the game, and that's kind of interesting when you think about games. You don't think about fairness and justice, philosophy kind of stuff here. But why is that important for building it? Why does the game have to be fair? Life's not fair.
Well, it just has to feel fair. It doesn't have to actually be fair. It can basically, as long as it tilts favorably into the player, what their expectation is, then people perceive it as fair.
Got it. So let's talk about the leaderboard, because one component of all these games is that people are playing the games, and if they get the high score, it appears on a leaderboard. And at the end of the promotion, if they have the highest score, they win a prize. And it's usually they get something, either it's a physical thing or it's a gift card or something. And you've had this experience because we're managing the clients' social media, where some people have complained oh, this game isn't fair. So it's kind of interesting that your people are talking about fairness in the context of it's a game. Who cares if it's fair? But people do care.
Yeah.
Why is that? Why does the game have to be fair?
So there's one specific complaint I'll come back to your point, but there's one specific complaint where somebody had played quite a lot, played 1,000 times. And
somebody played the game 1,000 times.
I think by the end they played 1,500 times.
That's kind of, yeah.
But
so speaking of engaging experiences, you want people to be, if they played it 1,500 times, they get bored with it, obviously. So that's a good sign.
Yeah, they kept playing. And so they had been at the top of the leaderboard, and then somebody got ahead of them on the leaderboard. And immediately they went onto the social media on the post basically for the game, and were like, this game is rigged, this game is a cheat, look at this, that, and the other. And then they played a little bit more, and then they got back on the leaderboard as a player. They're like, this game is good. It's oh, I don't see their name all over the leaderboard. How could they play? It's somebody could just get a high score. It just happens. And so they initially they were conspiracy.
People take it very, very seriously. They're which is kind of interesting because it's at the end of the day, it's a game for a promotional sale. But people take that experience very seriously, and they care about fairness. So all of this stuff that happens in the prototyping phase is very important, because if you can fix all that stuff, then you do the design part almost last, right? Because the design of it, the skin and the music, all of that is contingent on the gameplay. So if you design the game out and you're doing the gameplay, then you don't have enough time to actually make any tweaks.
So but the thing with the design is that once you've built sort of the core, experience that the players are gonna have, the design of it actually, the visual design, the graphics, come back in and actually do affect the gameplay, and then we have to readjust for that. So for example, we put in a sample graphic just to kind of see if it worked, and it's actually much taller than what is actually in the game. We have to readjust for everything. So the sizes are different. Well, not just that, it's just basically it'll affect the actual game itself. So we have to readjust everything to make sure. But hopefully by that point, we understand what the levers are in the game that we're trying to pull, and then we can adjust it accordingly. And if we don't, then I guess we're just, it's gonna be a long day.
It's going to be a long month. So let's go over the process again. So one, we come up with, on a quarterly basis, we ideate with the entire Tribe team. and then we present the ideas, let the clients select which games they want, and they align it with their promotional sales. And then what we do is we go through the prototyping phase and go through iteration after iteration, usually within like about a week or two. It's not that long.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have that long to work on.
You don't have that much time anyway. And so you're going through it, you're testing it out with beta testers, you're making sure the game is balanced, you're making sure the game is fair, making sure the game is fun. And then you're going to go through the design phase, and you're going to start adding some skins and some colors and characters and the whole shebang. And then you're tweaking the game to adjust it to match sort of the design aesthetic. And then the last part that you do is usually you're putting in the music, you're creating a landing page, you're pushing it out through social media. So all of that content is queued up, and then you're pushing it all out for the promotion, and you run the promotion for usually how long?
Usually goes for a month or so.
Usually for a month, and then at the end of it, whoever's the winner at the leaderboard, they win the prize. So that sounds like a lot of work, but it's actually the way that we've been managing it is that, sometimes what will happen is the design happens separately for the developer. It's happening simultaneously or concurrently. Sometimes they're happening sequentially.
Usually, even if the whoever's going to build the graphics for the game, even if they're not doing it right at that point, we'll still include them in conversation so they know, like, okay, this is what's happening. This is what I have to think about when I'm building out the graphics for this. Mm-hmm. These are the considerations I have to make. So we want to include everybody in the process of that build, whoever's actually going to be on the development team, so to speak, mm-hmm. so that they're informed. So you don't want to like go in the last minute, like, okay, cool, we need these graphics, here you go. You want them to be informed all the way through the process, and because people who are working on the game will contribute ideas even if they're not explicitly working on it. They'll be
exactly.
Like, oh, actually, make sure you do X thing because when I build the graphics, this is probably going to happen.
And that's where the Scrum or even the product owner kind of comes in. The Scrum Master on a daily basis, we're doing check-ins with the entire team, and everybody's saying, hey, this is what I did yesterday, this is what I'm doing today, this is any bottlenecks that I'm having. And when everybody can kind of see the work, it's all very transparent. They can say, oh, let me talk to you after this meeting to chat about what's going on. And the product owner is usually awesome for this case. His job or her job is to make sure the entire customer experience is unified, and it's great, and it's engaging, and it's not disjointed. What would happen previously using other project management approaches is that people would do their work and be like, all right, I'm done with my part of the assembly line, and they would hand it off to somebody else. And then, it doesn't fully match. And then you have this, like, by the time it gets to the end of the assembly line, it's like this disjointed Frankenstein, and it's a horrible experience. It could be a website, mobile app, or game. So having everybody involved in the scrums on a daily basis and also having a product owner is very important to creating a unified sort of customer experience. And that's kind of, I think, a nutshell for how we build games at Fifth Tribe. And this was a very project management oriented approach. And so we mentioned a few tools. We mentioned Jira is what we use to manage our Agile Scrum development. There's a sister app called Confluence, which we do our product roadmaps in. We do our wikis in there. We use Slack to communicate on a daily basis. Our project management philosophy is linked to Agile Scrum. I like to use Airtables to manage sort of our marketing and sales. And that's pretty much, I think in a nutshell, we've covered those three questions. And I think we did a pretty good job at answering most of them. And we could probably do a blog post explaining our game process a little bit, because it's very unique.
Maybe, but don't put me on the spot if you're on a live stream.
No, that's how we're going to do it. You should just write the blog post on a live stream.
On the live stream?
Let's do it. Go awesome!
Yeah. Check out our Twitch channel so you can see me type up a blog post.
In real time.
Yeah, in real time. It's going to be amazing.
All right, cool. All right, Camilla, any other questions?
That's it for this live stream, but next Monday.
All right, great. Well, thank you all for listening. Again, this is the Fifth Tribe Ask an Agency podcast. I'm Khurram.
I'm Asif.
And thank you for listening.